Parshas of Truma and Tetzave, it seems they follow an order. Truma talks about the structure of the Mishkan, the Kalim, building, courtyard. Truma concludes with the description of the structure. Tetzave begins to talk about the life of the Mishkan, the Kehanim, how they're to be dressed, how they are to be sanctified for their function. So it would seem that there is a theme that runs through. First we deal with the guf, so to speak, of the Mishkan, and the human element really is the neshama, it's the life of the Mishkan. The problem is that there's a little section, just 2 psukim in the beginning of Parshat Tetzave, that seem to be out of place. But the first 2 psukim of Tetzave, even before we discuss the Kehanim, the Chlal, speak about one aspect of the avoda that is meant to take place in the Mishkan. That olive oil should be taken, pure olive oil, and it is for the purpose of lighting in your tamid, a continuous flame, and this is to be kindled in the Olam Moed by Aaron and his sons. It's out of place. We haven't even talked about Aaron and his sons being inducted as Kehanim until the next section. If anything, perhaps this could be put back in Parshas Truma, adjacent to the Parsha of the Menorah, or perhaps it should be pushed off until after Parshas Tetzave. In the middle of the discussion of the Mishkan, the structure, and then the Kehanim, why do we put in this specific avoda of the lighting of the menorah? There's another question that the Mefarshim are bothered by, and it says, V'ata Tetzave, and you shall command the Bnei Yisrael, V'yikchei lecha, and they should bring to you the olive oil. This is a Kadosh Baruch Hu speaking to Moshe Rabbeinu. What is special about the olive oil that it has to be brought to Moshe Rabbeinu? The Ramban says that Moshe Rabbeinu was meant to examine the oil to see if it was the top quality, if it was of the requisite purity. And the Mefarshim are bothered. And the Tziv asks in the Ramban that Moshe Rabbeinu couldn't rely on the various other people that were in charge. This was something that required his attention. And undoubtedly, everything that was made required some type of inspection. There must have been people in charge that could pass judgment on whether it was good enough. Because why was this specifically brought to Moshe Rabbeinu? The truth is, there's a medrash on this pasuk. It's medrash Tanchuma here. It's a medrash Rabbah in Parshas Emor, which says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was telling Moshe Rabbeinu the following. He said, Melech asisicha, I made you a king. And the king doesn't do his own work. A king has other people working for him. So therefore, v'ata tetzaveh b'nei Yisrael. Since you're a king, you go and tell the b'nei Yisrael to bring the olive oil. And again, the question is, if the whole point is that Moshe shouldn't do the work himself, rather he should delegate, why does the Torah bring that out specifically with regards to the olive oil? And in fact, as we'll learn in Parshas Kisisa and Parshas Vayakel, really all the work of the Mishkan was delegated. There was Betzalel, there was his assistant Aholiav, everything was done by other people. Moshe Rabbeinu was in charge, but he didn't do anything himself. So why does the Torah make this point specifically regarding the Shemin? So these are some questions about these 2 odd psukim. Let's talk a little bit about the mitzvah of lighting of the menorah from a halachic perspective, and maybe we'll come back to some of these questions. When it comes to the mitzvah of the menorah, there are really 2 parts of the mitzvah. There is the hatavas haneros. The hatavas haneros means that in the morning, the kohen would clean out the menorah, he'd remove the burnt wick, remove the used oil, he would replace the wick with a new one, he'd add oil, and this was done every morning. Every morning the lamps were prepared for the lighting of the following evening. That's called the Hatavas Hanevis. And then in the evening, the menorah was lit. This is the sheet of most Rishonim. Rashi, the Rambam, the Rashba. There is a sheet of the Rambam who holds that the menorah was lit in the evening and in the morning. But most Rishonim hold that the Hatava was in the morning and the Hadlaka was in the evening. There's a very interesting machloikas Rishonim regarding the mitzvah of the menorah. It's based on the Gemara in Yuma. The Gemara in Yuma says the following, that we know that a zar, a person who's not a kayin, cannot perform avoda in the Beis HaMikdash. However, not every avoda is punishable. There are certain avodos that if a zar does them, he's chayev misbedei shemayim, he's liable for death at the hands of heaven. There are certain other avodas that they're forbidden, only a kayin can do them, but they're not punishable. And the Gemara says the rule is as follows, that an avodah to be liable for the death penalty must be an avodah she'ein achareha avodah. It must be an avodah which is the end, the final step. It can't be an avodah which is followed by another avodah. So the Gemara says like this. The Gemara says that if a zar performed the dishun hamanayra, if a zar removed the old wick, removed the old oil, it's forbidden. He's not allowed to do it. It has to be done by a kayin. But there's no chiyuv misbedei shemayim, because it's an avodah sheyesh achareha avodah. There's a step which follows, putting in the new wick. If a zar put in a new wick, he's also not liable, because there's a step that follows that, putting in the new oil. If you put in the new oil, you're also not liable for that, because there's a step which follows, the hadlaka, the lighting, the following evening. What if a zar lit the menorah? Says the Gemara, hadlaka lav avoidei. The lighting of the menorah is not called an avodah. So he's not liable for that. So there's machlekes rishonim how to learn pshat in the Gemara. The sheet of the Rambam in Hilchos Bias Mikdash is that the hadlaka of the menorah is kosher bizarre. It can be lit even by a Yisrael. That's the sheet of the Rambam, which itself is a very, very odd thing. It comes out that the hatavas hamenorah, preparing the lamps, that can only be done by a kohen. If a zar does it, he's not liable for misa, because every step is an avodah sheyesh achreha avodah. But it must be done by a kohen. It can't be done by a zar. But the lighting of the menorah is not an avodah, and therefore it can be done by a zar, even though Yisrael can light the menorah. So the question is, it doesn't seem to make any sense. The Hatavas HaNevis seems to be only a preparation for the Hadlaka. So the preparation is called an avodah, but the lighting is not called an avodah. The preparation requires a kayin, but the lighting doesn't require a kayin. It seems very, very odd. But this is the sheet of the Rambam, that although the Hatavas HaNevis cannot be done by a zar, it's true, he wouldn't be chayiv misbedei shemayim, because it's an avodah sheish achreha avodah, but it must be done by a kayin. It can't be done by a zar. But the hadlaka can even be done by a zar. That's the shita of the Rambam. The Ritva in Yuma asks a kasha on the Rambam, that he says, if you look in all the psukim in the Torah, all the psukim that refer to the menorah talk about Aaron Ubanav, Aaron and his children. So how can you say that the mitzvah doesn't require a kayin? So the Ritva says, avada, even the lighting of the menorah requires a kayin. But it's not called an avoda in the sense that it would require the kayin to wear bigdei kahuna. And therefore, there's no chiyuv misa for doing that avoda. In other words, we know that there are certain things that are not called avoda, which also require kehanim. For example, we know that the examination of a mitzvah, if you want to examine whether a person has tsaras, you bring him to the kayin. That's not called an avodah. That's not a service of the temple. That's a mitzvah which is incumbent on kaihanim. The kayin wouldn't have to wear big day kahuna while he's doing that, because big day kahuna is only when you're performing avodah. So therefore says the Ritva, avada, the mitzvah of lighting the menorah is a mitzvah that must be done by kaihanim, just like examining a mitzvah. But it's not called avodah. And therefore it doesn't require big day kahuna, and therefore if a zar does it, he's not chayav misa. If a zar would examine a mitzvah, he wouldn't be chayav misa. The chayav misa is only for avodah. This is not an avodah. It's a mitzvah which is incumbent on kaihanim. A Yisrael can't do it. It has to be a kayin. But it's not called avodah. And therefore there's no need for big day kahuna, and there's no chayav misa for it, even though it is a final step. So even according to the Ritva who argues in the Rambam, it's also the fact that the lighting isn't called an avodah. That's why it doesn't require big day kahuna. So again, it's an anomaly. How is it possible that the preliminary stages, cleaning out the menorah and adding the wick and adding the oil, that's called avodah, and therefore the kayin has to wear big day kahuna when he does it? Okay, there's no chiyuv misbeshemayim, because it's an avodah sheish achrei avodah, but it's called an avodah, and the lighting is not called an avodah. So even according to the avodah, it requires a kayin, but it's not called an avodah, and therefore you don't need big day kahuna. How do you understand that? Now the Gemara goes on to ask a question. The Gemara brings a brisa, which says that when you kindle the twigs on the mizbeach to keep the fire going, that is called an avodah, and that requires a kayin who's wearing big day kahuna. So the Gemara asks, what's the difference between lighting the menorah and lighting these twigs to keep the fire on the altar going? So the Gemara says, no. Hatzotzas alisa, lighting the twigs, that's called avodah. But lighting the menorah, that's not called avodah. And the difference isn't apparent. What difference does it make whether you're lighting the twigs to keep the fire on the altar going, or you're lighting the wick of the menorah? Why should one be called an avodah, the other not be called an avodah? Very perplexing. Now let's talk about the idea of avodah b'chlal. The ways we serve the Ribono Shel Olam in the Beis HaMikdash. We bring animals, we slaughter the animals, we burn the animals on the altar. As we know that the Ribono Shel Olam has no physical form, he has no body, he has no material needs. So what is the idea of an animal sacrifice? As we know, the Ummah Sa'olam, the Evdei Avodah Zarah, genuinely believed that they were serving something to the gods. They were giving a meal to the gods, they were giving a drink to the gods when they poured wine on their altars. Because we certainly can't be doing the same thing. Ribono Shel Olam doesn't need a barbecue, he doesn't need a cocktail. So what is the idea of what we're doing in the Beis HaMikdash? And we find that in the Rishonim, there's a tendency to interpret the Avodas HaKarbonos in such a way that avoids these problems. For example, the Ramban, Parshat Vayikra, famous Ramban, the Ramban says that what is the symbolism of an animal sacrifice? That the animal is symbolic of the human being, and what the person is saying when he brings the carbon is that for my Averis, really that should be done to me. I really should be executed. I should be burnt at the stake. So the burning of the animal on the altar really is a vicarious execution, Ramban says. Why does Ramban say this pshat? Because he's trying to avoid the problem of interpreting the carbon kipshuta, which is giving God a gift. We find, for example, a Rashi in Chumash, on the pasuk which says that the karbonos are reach nichayach, a pleasing fragrance to Hashem, which kipshuta means that somehow HaKadosh Baruch Hu enjoys the odor, the scent of roasting meat. So Rashi says no, that reach nichayach means nachas ruach lefanai, that there is a satisfaction, sha'amarti v'nasa ritzayni, I spoke and my will was done. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu has a nachas ruach, he has a satisfaction because his will was done. He commanded us to do something, we did it, so there's a nachas ruach. So it's not a fragrant smell, reach nichayach. It means a nachas ruach, a satisfaction. Again, why does Rashi say this? Because he wants to avoid the simple understanding that somehow we are providing some physical pleasure to God. The problem is when you go back to Chazal, you see that Chazal had no qualms about putting it that way. Just to give you an illustration. Now, the Torah says that when you are Oile Regel, when you go to Yerushalayim for the Shalosh Rebavim, so it says, Lo Yero'u Panai Reikam, don't come empty-handed. So the Gemara says, that what does it mean not to come empty-handed? You bring a carbon ola. You bring a burnt offering. So the Gemara says, what's the svara? Why specifically a burnt offering? So the Gemara says, Shlo ye shulchancha malei v'shulchan rabcha reikam. It shouldn't be that your table is full, you're eating and drinking at Yontif, and the Rebbeinu Shalom's table is empty. It's not nice. So you have to serve him too. So you bring a carbon ola. That's Shulchan Rabcha Mole. Now your Rebbe's table is also full. Chazal are putting it, you're serving God a meal. It has to be, can't be that your table is full and his table is empty. And there are many, many other remuzim to such an idea. So how do we understand it? If it's a theological fact that God has no physical form or substance, what is the idea of bringing karbonos with the simple understanding that we are giving something to God? Lulei de Mistafina, I wouldn't be scared of putting my head into a place I don't belong. I would say the following. We know that when we speak of God in ways that aren't theologically accurate. When the Torah speaks about God's body parts, the eyes of God and the hands of God, the arm of God, the feet of God, and so on and so forth. And the Rambam explains that these are all metaphors. Of course, HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not have eyes or hands or ears. He doesn't have any body parts. He has no physical form or substance. But we speak of God metaphorically, and that's permitted because Dibra Torah Kalash M'Ne'odom. The Torah speaks the language of men. Instead of speaking in abstractions, philosophical abstractions, the Torah speaks in a down-to-earth way that people can understand, even if it isn't technically accurate. HaKadosh Baruch Hu allows us to speak of him in that way. And the Rambam devotes much attention in the first chelik of the Moreh Nevuchim to explain the precise meaning of the metaphors, but it really is a license. We are allowed to speak of God in a way which is not technically accurate. This is a concession to the fact that we're human beings, and we're not all philosophers, and we can't speak of God in, again, theoretical abstractions. So God lets us speak of him in a down-to-earth way, even if it isn't technically true. I would say that Chazal understand it isn't only that we can speak of God that way, we're even allowed to serve God that way. The avoda of karbonos is a metaphor. How can we serve the Ribono Shel Olam? So HaKadosh Baruch Hu allows us to serve him in the way that a human being would be served. How do we serve a human king? We serve him a meal, we serve him a drink, and so on and so forth. HaKadosh Baruch Hu allows us to serve him that way. It's a metaphor for avoda based on human experience. So in fact, you are serving him a meal, you're putting meat in front of him, you're putting wine in front of him, not that he needs meat and wine. But just like HaKadosh Baruch Hu allows us to speak of him in ways that aren't theologically precise, he allows us to serve him in ways that aren't theologically precise, and therefore that's what the avoda is. The truth is that we've said many times the Maral in the Nesif HaAvoda, who says, what is the idea of karbonos? Why are karbonos called avoda? And this is a very interesting thing. He says that avoda comes from lashon eved, a slave. What is the halacha? What law in Hilchas Avadim really conveys the essence of what it means to be a slave? So Maral says it's a halacha of mashakana eved kamarabo. It's a halacha that when an eved takes possession of, doesn't belong to him, it becomes his master's property. Whereas an eved is not a legal person. He cannot own property. He can pick something up, it automatically becomes his master's. That means an eved has nothing of his own. His very existence is for the sake of his master. So when we take something and give it to the Ribono Shel Olam, as if to say, it's not mine, I'm giving it to you, that is a declaration of our being avodim. That's why it's called avoda. And that really is the point of the avoda sakarbonos, according to the Maral. We are actually giving something to the Ribono Shel Olam. Not that he really needs it or can appreciate it or wants it, but again, in a metaphoric sense, we are giving something to him, and thereby we are declaring ourselves to be his avodim. And the truth is, the halach itself recognizes this. One of the halachas that I didn't mention before, as to when a zar is chayev misa and when a zar is not chayev misa, the Gemara makes a distinction between what is called avodas matana and avodas siluk. An avoda where you are giving something to God, and an avoda where you're taking away something from God. And the Gemara learns from Sukkim that the din that a zar is chayev misa b'dei shemayim is only for avodas matana, not for avodas siluk. So, for example, if you burn something on the mizbeach, that's called avodas matana, you're chayev misa. But trumas hadeshin, if you remove the ashes from the mizbeach, that's called avodas siluk, and for that you're not chayev misa. Now, the truth is, if the idea of avodah is, as Rashi says, that it's a nachas ruach, God has a satisfaction because His will was done. So what difference does it make whether we put something on the altar or take something off the altar? If we're doing what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants, so either way there's the same nachas ruach. Because what should the basis be for a distinction between avodas matana and avodas siluk? Now the answer is because if the essence of avodah is giving something, so there's a big difference between giving and taking away. Now it's true that taking away is part of the giving. If I serve you a meal, part of the serving you the meal is clearing the dishes afterward. But there's a very big difference between the actual serving of the dish and the removal of the plate when you're finished. The one is more of an avodah than the other. If the essence of avodah is the giving something to the Ribono Shel Olam, then the distinction between avodas matan and avodas siluk now makes sense. So even though both are called avoda and the zar cannot perform either, but I understand why the one should be more punishable than the other. But if you think of avoda as simply the satisfaction you give to HaKadosh Baruch Hu because you did His will, it's hard to understand what the difference should be. If His will is to put something down on the altar and His will is to take something off the altar, why should one be more punishable than the other? Because it seems that the essence of the avodah is the giving, it's the serving God. And therefore that's why there's a distinction between avodas matan and avodas siluk. So let's talk about lighting the menorah. Should lighting the menorah be called avodah? Well, what are you giving God? Well, we might have thought that in the same way that when you bring a carbon, you're providing God with meat, metaphorically, or you pour wine on the altar, you're giving Him wine metaphorically. Perhaps when you light the menorah, you're giving Him light. You're providing the Ribono Shel Olam with light. So here the Gemara addresses this point. And the Gemara says, brings a pasuk in Parshat Emor, which says, Michutz lepareiches ha'edus, that the testimony of the menorah is outside of the pareiches. The pareiches was the curtain that separated the heichal from the kodesh hakadoshim. The menorah was on the outside. Michutz lepareiches ha'edus. The testimony is outside the pareiches, referring to the menorah. So the Gemara says, what does this pasuk mean? In what way is the menorah edus? So the Gemara says like this: you can't tell me the purpose of the menorah is to provide light. Does God need light? For 40 years we traveled in the midbar by the light of the Amud HaEsh. So certainly HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't need the light of the menorah we provide. And Tosas asks the question, that the Gemara should ask a better question, that the whole world is illuminated by the sun and the moon that He created. So of course He doesn't need our menorah. It's a more basic question. But in any case, it can't be that we're providing light. Elamai, what is it? It's Eidus Shashchina Sher B'Yisrael. That the flame of the menorah, which miraculously lasts longer than the oil supply, is an Eidus, is a testimony Shashchina Sher B'Yisrael. So the idea is that the light of the menorah is not something which we provide the Ribono Shel Olam with. It's something that Ribono Shel Olam provides us with. It's the exact opposite of every other carbon. Every other carbon, I am giving something to the Ribono Shel Olam. The lighting of the menorah is HaKadosh Baruch Hu is giving something to us. He is giving a testimony that the Shekhinah is Share of Yisrael. And therefore, the idea is Parshat. When it comes to lighting the twigs on the altar to keep the fire going, that's part of the process of giving the Ribono Shel Olam something. I'm giving him a barbecue, so to speak. I'm giving him the reach nichayach. I'm giving him the pleasing fragrance of the burning meat. So part of that process is making a fire on which you burn the meat, on which you burn the fat. So therefore, the kindling of the twigs, that sasas halisa, that is part of the process of giving. So therefore, that's called avoda. That's called avoda. By the menorah, even though, of course, it's a human being who lights the menorah, it's really considered like HaKadosh Baruch Hu is lighting. We are lighting, in a sense, as shluchim of the Ribono Shel Olam. This is not our giving to the Ribono Shel Olam. We are lighting this for him to provide the edus. So the preparation is avoda. Because the HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I want you to be ma'afshir. I want you to make possible my giving this testimony. So to arrange, to set up the menorah, to put in the wick, to put in the oil, that's an avoda. We're giving HaKadosh Baruch Hu something that he wants. But the last step, which is the kindling, in the symbolism of the menorah, it's the Ribono Shel Olam who's kindling. He's lighting the flame to give an edus, Shashchina Sher Yisrael, and that's why it's not avoda b'chlal. It's not something we're giving to the Ribono Shel Olam. It's something the Ribono Shel Olam is giving to us, and therefore it's not called avoda. So it's true, who was given this mitzvah? This mitzvah was given to Kehanim. So it's like everything that Kehanim do, which isn't avoda, just like examining a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah which is given to Kehanim, but it's not called an avoda. It's not a service of God. So here too, the lighting of the menorah is not a service of God, because the essence of service of God is what we give to the Ribono Shel Olam. This is really what the Ribono Shel Olam is giving us. Therefore it's not called an avoda. So again, as we said, according to the Rambam, Yisrael can do it, but even according to the Ritva, that the Torah is clear that it's Aaron Ubanov, but it's still not called avoda. And that's why it doesn't require big day kahuna. With this alone, we've answered half the question. So now we understand, in a sense, why this Parsha has to be placed before the Kehanim are selected. Because the next Parsha says, now take the Kehanim mitoch b'nei Yisrael l'chahanoli. Select the Kehanim, prepare them, clothe them, in order to perform the avoda. So that's true. That is all necessary for the role that the Kehanim play in bringing the karbonos to performing avoda. But lighting the menorah is not avoda. And therefore the mitzvah of the Kehanim lighting the menorah has to be written before the Kehanim are singled out and given the bidei kahuna to perform avoda. And that's why the Parsha is very, very much beseder. And maybe just to add a nakuda, to add a little bit of a point. The Parsha talks about the bidei kahuna, that when the Kehanim perform avoda, they have to wear the bidei kahuna. So what is the idea of wearing bidei kahuna to perform the avoda? In past years we spoke about the machlokas between the chinuch and the Ramban. The chinuch says the idea of wearing the avoda, wearing the bidei kahuna, is to remind the kayin of his special responsibilities. You know, the kayin is performing the avoda, he shouldn't take it lightly, so therefore he wears these very cumbersome, uncomfortable begadim, which serve as a reminder that he is a kayin and he has to live up to that responsibility. That's the sheet of the chinuch. The Ramban said the idea is that Klal Yisrael clothes the Kehanim in these regal clothes in order to exalt the Kehanim and put them on a pedestal as role models for the nation. The truth is, each of the approaches has a difficulty. The difficulty of the chinuch is that the halacha of bidei kahuna is that they're paid for by the tzibur. The tzibur pays for the bidei kahuna. L'chara, if they're meant to serve as a reminder for the Kehanim to perform their job, this should be something which the Kehanim pay out of their own pocket. This should be something they need as part of their responsibility. Why should the tzibur provide that? On the Ramban, there's another kasha. That l'chara, if the idea is to hold them as role models, so why do they only wear the begadim while they're performing the avoda? You know, if the Kehanim are meant to be the role models for the entire tzibur, they should wear the bigdei kahuna all the time. They should walk around as kings even when they're off duty. I think there may be a third approach to the whole understanding of bigdei kahuna. Let's bring it out this way. Now, the Gemara Megillah says that when Talmai commissioned the Greek translation of the Torah, so the Chachamim made certain changes because there were certain things that they wouldn't understand. So one of the changes was like this. There's a pasuk which says that by Maimed Har Sinai, Vayishlach esnare b'nei Yisrael, that Moshe sent the young men of the Bnei Yisrael, Vayalu oilais, they brought burnt offerings, Vayizbechu zvachim shlomim l'Hashem parim, and they brought cattle as shlomim to the Ribono Shel Olam. So the Gemara says they made a change there, and they changed the word nareg to the word zatute, which means the nobles, not the young folk, but the nobles they sent to bring the korbanos. So Rashi says, what was the thing that Talmai would not understand? He wouldn't understand. What? You're bringing korbanos to the Ribono Shel Olam. Who do you send? You send the young people? You send nobodies? The pchusim shebahem? You send the lowliest people? You're bringing korbanos. You have to send the best people, the most dignified people. So therefore, they don't want to get involved in a dispute, so they changed the translation. Instead of the translation reading Nare, it reads Zatute. In other words, that really, this is something which makes no sense. If you're sending someone to bring a korban, who do you send? You send the most dignified person. Because why is that? It's Parsha. If the whole idea of the avodah of korbanos is the idea we're declaring ourselves to be avodim, if we send a lowly person, a very young person, or an undignified person, what are we really saying? Yeah, he's an Eved. Says, I'm a duke, I'm a nobleman. He's an Eved, he's a slave. And you go, bring korbanos, grovel, be mevatel yourself. Says, I'm still what I think I am. The whole idea of a korban is thereby negated. If the idea of the korban is that Klal Yisrael as a nation declares itself to be subservient to the Ribono Shel Olam, that means Klal Yisrael has to take the greatest among us and say that even the greatest among us is mevatel himself to the Ribono Shel Olam, and kal v'chomer those that are beneath him in station. And therefore that's what we do. We take these Kehanim, we dress them like kings, we say, you are the greatest among us, you are the most dignified, the most noble, the most honorable, the most scholarly, the most refined, and you are the person that we send to bring korbanos, to declare that we are the Ribono Shel Olam's avodim, and therefore the rest of us, kal v'chomer, are also the Ribono Shel Olam's avodim. So that's why the avodah of korbanos requires bigdei kahuna, because the avodah of korbanos, as we said, which is giving to the Ribono Shel Olam, it's a hisbatlus, it's a self-negation. So in order to really achieve this self-negation, we have to show that the greatest of us is batel, klapid the Ribono Shel Olam. But in the avodah of adlakas hamenorah, that's not an act of self-negation. To the contrary, that's an act of the Ribono Shel Olam bestowing honor upon us. The Ribono Shel Olam is saying that look, the Shechina Shereb Yisrael. So here, there's no halacha to send dafka the most dignified person, and therefore, although Aaron Ubanav do it, they do it not as Kehanim, and they don't wear the bigdei kahuna. The Netziv brings a very beautiful medrash on this parsha. It says that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe that take Aaron and his children to make them Kehanim, because for a moment Moshe Rabbeinu had a chalisha sadas. Moshe Rabbeinu felt bad because he thought that he'd be the Kayan. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him that I gave you something more precious than the avoda. I gave the Torah to you, and there's no greater honor than being the one through whom I gave the Torah to Klal Yisrael. So on this conversation, the Medrash applies the pasuk, Lulei Torascha Shashuai, Oz Avadati Ba'oni. If not for the Torah, I would be lost in my despair. In other words, had HaKadosh Baruch Hu not consoled me, says Moshe Rabbeinu, by explaining that I gave the Torah through you, I would have been lost in my despair because I had lost the opportunity to perform avoda. The Netziv, elaborating on this medrash, says an amazing thing. He says that we know, of course, the Mishkan was a place of avoda, but it also was a place in which Moshe Rabbeinu received Torah. If we go back to last week's Parsha, Parsha's Truma, after the command was given to make the Aron and the Kapores, HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe Rabbeinu, he said that I will meet you there. I will meet you there. I will speak to you from between the two kruvim which are on the Aron HaEdus. In other words, the Mishkan in one sense was for all of Klal Yisrael, but in another sense there was an aspect of the Mishkan which was just for Moshe Rabbeinu. The Mishkan was set up to be the place from which HaKadosh Baruch Hu communicated to Moshe Rabbeinu. The Netziv says there are two chalakim of Torah. There is the substance of Torah which is given by God directly to Moshe Rabbeinu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu spoke to him, gave him mitzvahs, and that is associated with the Aron. That the Shechina spoke to Moshe Rabbeinu from the Shnei HaKruvim, and from the time that the Mishkan was built, Moshe never went back to Har Sinai. All communication took place in the Oyel Moed. That's what the Aron was. The Aron was the place from which HaKadosh Baruch Hu spoke directly to Moshe Rabbeinu. But there's another aspect of Torah, which is the idea of chidush in Torah, of understanding, of pilpul, taking the words of Torah that already were given and being able to delve into them and understand them, and the tzinar, the pipeline, if you will, the channel for that hashpah, that gift of creativity and understanding and insight in Torah, came through the menorah. The flames of the menorah are symbolic of the light of Torah, chidushay Torah, Torah Sheba'al Peh, and that came from the menorah. The Aron was the place of direct communication. The menorah is the place where there was a shefa, there was a bounty of creativity and insight that was given to be able to understand Torah. Of course, we all know the famous Gemara. The Gemara says, "Basra, harotza sheyach gem yadim." The person wants to become wise, you daven towards the south. Harotza sheyashir yatzpin. If you want to be rich, you daven towards the north. V'simonech, and the sign for this is that shulchan b'tzafon and menorah b'darim. The shulchan was in the north, and the menorah was in the south. Now, the shulchan with the lechem apanim, that was the tzinars through which parnasa, through which material livelihood was transmitted to Klal Yisrael. The menorah was the vessel through which chachma was transmitted to Klal Yisrael, not the Aron. The Aron was the oracle of direct communication. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to give new mitzvahs, repeat mitzvahs, review mitzvahs, but he wanted to transmit a substantive message, that was from the Aron. But the shefa of innovation and creativity and depth and insight, that came through the channel of the menorah. The Gemara in Nedarim says an amazing thing. The Gemara in Nedarim says that Torah was originally given to Moshe Rabbeinu and his children alone. And Moshe Rabbeinu was noyeg teivasayin, he was generous, and he gave it to the rest of Klal Yisrael. So the Gemara brings many psukim that how can you say it was given to Moshe Rabbeinu? We know that Moshe Rabbeinu himself said many times that I taught the Torah to you just as I was commanded to do. So the Gemara answers, you're right. Avada, the mitzvahs that were given to Moshe Rabbeinu, he gave to Klal Yisrael. This statement refers to Pilpula Ba'alma. This refers to the Pilpul of Torah. The Pilpul of Torah was originally given to Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was generous, he gave it to Klal Yisrael. Meaning, that which Moshe Rabbeinu received through the Aron, the substance of mitzvahs, that was really given over to Klal Yisrael. That was the original intention. God gave it to Moshe to repeat to the Bnei Yisrael. But the Havana, the pilpul, that originally was meant for Moshe Rabbeinu alone. The shefa of the menorah was really for him. But Moshe Rabbeinu was noig toivasayin. He was generous, so he involved other people in that too. But it really was for him. That means that the lighting of the menorah, says the Netziv, which was to bring this shefa, really was, in a real sense, for Moshe Rabbeinu specifically. Now, this light of Torah Shabbal Peh, this was something that was really meant originally for Moshe Rabbeinu. So when Aaron lit the menorah, says the Netziv, there's an aspect of his doing so for Moshe Rabbeinu. So the Netziv says that's the meaning of these psukim. It says that Moshe was commanded, tell the Bnei Yisrael to bring you the Shemen Zayas. And Aaron should light the menorah. And the Medrash says that you're a melech, and other people do your work for you. And the question is, why is this point brought out specifically over here? Says the Netziv, because in a real sense, the menorah really was lit for Moshe Rabbeinu. The menorah, in the sense that it is the channel through which insight and understanding of Torah was given, originally the Gemara in the Darchei says that was destined only for Moshe Rabbeinu. So Aaron was lighting it for Moshe Rabbeinu. It's totally different than every other avoda. It's not something that Aaron did for Klal Yisrael. It's something he did for Moshe Rabbeinu. And therefore that will answer all the questions in a slightly different way. When we talk about the Big Day Kahuna, what does it say? It says, "Va'ata hakre ve'elechas Aaron achicha bezbanav ito." Bring Aaron and his children, mitoch b'nei Yisrael l'chanoli, from the b'nei Yisrael to serve me. Clearly, the emphasis is on the idea that what Aaron and his sons are doing as Kehanim is for Klal Yisrael. They're taking Aaron and his sons mitoch b'nei Yisrael l'chanoli, from among the Jewish people to serve me. They are serving the Ribono Shel Olam as representatives of Klal Yisrael. And that's why, as we said, Klal Yisrael clothes them in these very ornate Big Day Kahuna. The lighting of the menorah is not only, as we said, the Eidos from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It is also the drawing of Shefa for Moshe Rabbeinu and the Talmid HaChachamim of every dar. It's also something which HaKadosh Baruch Hu provides, and therefore the Kehanim who perform that are not doing it as Shluchim of the nation as a whole. In this specific instance, they're doing it as Shluchim of Moshe Rabbeinu, and as the Tikkun Zayar says, the Talmid HaChachamim of every generation are his Pashtus of the Moshe. They are considered the extension of Moshe Rabbeinu. That's why it's not an avoda. It is not something we're giving to the Ribono Shel Olam. It is something that we are receiving from the Ribono Shel Olam. Both in the sense, as we said, that it's an Eidos Hashchina Sher B'Yisrael, and also it's the Hamshacha, it's the drawing of the Shefa that comes from Shemayim of creativity and insight and depth in Torah. But since in that generation is specific to Moshe Rabbeinu, that's why there's the emphasis on the Ata Tetzave. Here you are doing it. It's interesting that this is the Parsha, of course, where Moshe Rabbeinu's name isn't mentioned. And we always assume that in this Parsha, it's because Aaron really is the central figure in this Parsha. The Big Kahuna and the investiture of the Kehanim and the Avodah the Kehanim perform. So Moshe Rabbeinu, in a sense, steps back. But it comes out, as the Netziv says, that really these first two psukim in the Parsha are really bringing out a very interesting point, that Aaron is functioning, in a sense, as the servant of Moshe Rabbeinu. That's what the Medrash says, that you're a melech. And the Melech has his servants do work for him. It's not only the Bnei Yisrael are bringing the Shemen Zayas. Even Aaron's lighting the menorah really is for the drawing of the Shefa. And I think there may be a point to this, which is as follows: that when it comes to Talmid HaChachamim and the ability of Talmid HaChachamim to be Mechadish Chidushei Torah and to be Pesach Halachas and so on and so forth, really their ability to do that is really only in the schus of their audience. In other words, the people that rely on them, the people that learn from them, They provide the schus with which the shefa is nimshach to the Talmud Chacham to be able to understand, to be able to teach, and so on and so forth. As we know that the greatest Talmud of Moshe Rabbeinu, in a sense, was Aaron. This is a very, very complex thing, because we know that Yoshua ultimately was the successor. But it seems that the reason Yoshua was the successor is not because Yoshua learned the most from Moshe Rabbeinu. It's because Yoshua was Moshe Nefesh to attend Moshe Rabbeinu. Right? No tzer ta'ena yoichal, period, the Medrash says. The person who guards the fig tree eats from the fruit. So Yoshua attended Moshe Rabbeinu. He took care of the Beis Medrash. He arranged the seats. So Mamela, Yoshua was zeicha to be the successor to Moshe Rabbeinu. But the Gemara Eruvin says that in the Seder, in the order of Talmud, Aaron was the closest Talmud of Moshe Rabbeinu. First Moshe Rabbeinu came, and then he taught it to Aaron. Then Aaron sat to the side, and then the Bnei Aaron came in, and he taught it to them. And then they sat to the side. And then the Zkanim came in, and he taught it to them, and they sat to the side. And then the Bnei Yisrael came in, and he taught it to them a fourth time. So Aaron at that point heard it 4 times. And then Moshe Rabbeinu went away, and Aaron repeated it again for everybody. Then Aaron already had heard it 4 times, and he was nostalgic, and so on and so forth. But it seems that the person who heard it the most times directly from Moshe Rabbeinu was Aaron. Because he really was the Talmud of Moshe Rabbeinu, the closest Talmud of Moshe Rabbeinu in terms of learning the most. He didn't arrange the benches, so it wasn't like Yeshua. But in terms of learning, he was the one to learn from Moshe Rabbeinu. And therefore he is the one who, through the lighting of the menorah, brings the shefa of understanding and insight to Moshe Rabbeinu, with which Moshe Rabbeinu in turn is able to teach him. And that's something that we have to know, that if we want to be zoicha, to have the Torah and the understanding and the insight of our Talmidei Chachamim and Rabbanim and Mechanchim and so on and so forth, we have to be mamshich that shefa. We have to draw that shefa down through our interest, through our involvement, through our challenging them, and then we become the vessel to bring that shefa down to them and through them in turn to us.